real stories of werewolves, of Dogman from history, from your emails, illustrated and animated with the democratizing magic of machine learning AI. Welcome to Scary Stories.
Lost in Werewolf Woods. Dear Scary Stories NYC, the storm that hit Traverse City the first day of this month, December 2024, was like nothing I'd ever seen before. Living in Michigan, you do get used to winter weather, but this was different. The snow came down in sheets so thick you could barely see your hand in front of your face, and the wind howled like a freight train through the streets. I was late getting back home from a business meeting I had to the east of town. I had wanted to get ahead of the weather, but instead I was stuck in it, and it looked to be getting worse. I was somewhere near the railroad tracks in 3 Mile Road when my car engine just up and died. I got out and attempted to walk the rest of the way home. Well, no sooner had I closed the car door when a combination of wind and the slippery, icy roadway caused my feet to come out from underneath me. I found myself landing hard on my butt, and it knocked the wind out of me both in a literal and a figurative sense. By the time I was standing again, I was already tired, and I had a long walk ahead of me in snowfall that was becoming increasingly harder and harder to see in. For the first 10 minutes, I just concentrated on putting one foot in front of the other. I kept the wind in my back and followed what I thought was Arrow Park Drive heading west. But in weather like that, everything looks different. The familiar landmarks of my hometown disappeared behind curtains of white, and the few streetlights that were still working created these weird, diffused halos in the blowing snow. I think I took a wrong turn at Albuquerque because the buildings started thinning out. Instead of the tightly packed houses of my neighborhood, I was seeing more trees, their branches heavy with snow and creaking in the wind. That's when I started to suspect I had wandered into one of the streets that lead to the east of town. The smart thing would have been to turn around right then, but between the disorientation of the storm and the fact that I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead, I just kept going, thinking I'd probably recognize something soon enough. I didn't want to believe I was heading in the wrong direction. That was when I heard it. A sound that did not belong to the storm. Something between a wolf's howl and a man's shout, but wrong, in a way that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I stopped dead in my tracks, my breath forming thick clouds in front of my face. There was movement in the trees to my left. Something big, much bigger than a person should be. Through the swirling snow, I caught glimpses of dark fur, of a massive shape moving on 2 legs. My mind went straight to all those stories I'd heard growing up, tales of the Michigan Dogman that I'd always dismissed as campfire nonsense. Well, I wasn't dismissing them anymore. That thing stepped into a clearing about 30 feet away, and for one terrible moment, I saw it clearly. It stood at least 8 feet tall, with a wolf's head sitting atop an almost human-like body, covered in thick, dark fur. Its eyes caught what little light there was and reflected it back like yellow flames. Those eyes locked onto mine, and I saw intelligence there, and what looked to me like hunger. I ran. I'd like to say I had some kind of a plan, that I made smart decisions about which direction to run in, but that would all be a lie. Pure animal instinct took over, and I just ran as fast as I could through the deep snow. Behind me, I heard it moving. Not running yet, but following with a terrible purposefulness that suggested it was just toying with me. The wind cut into my face like knives, and my lungs burned from the frozen air. Every few seconds I'd hear that thing let out another one of those terrible howl shouts. Sometimes it was closer. Sometimes it was further away. It felt like it was hurting me. And maybe it was. I crashed through the snow-laden branches, stumbled over hidden logs, and somehow I kept going. That dogman behind me started getting closer. I could hear the crunch of its footsteps in the snow, the sound of its breathing. That was when the real chase began. I caught sight of it moving faster than anything that size had any right to move. Yet it kept letting me stay ahead of it. It kept letting me get away. Sometimes I could feel it right behind me, so close that I swear I could smell its wet fur and decay stench. Every time I thought I was done for, then this howl would send my adrenaline into overload, and I'd find another burst of speed I didn't even know I had. Through my panic, I started noticing changes in my surroundings. The trees were thinning out again, and there was something familiar about the way the ground sloped. When I burst out of the tree line and saw the backs of houses, I almost cried with relief. I was back in town somehow. The thing had chased me in a huge arc that led right back to civilization. The howling stopped, but I kept running. When I finally worked up the courage to look back, the woods behind me seemed still and empty. Nothing moving but the falling snow. But I could feel those yellow eyes watching me from the darkness between the trees. And I knew with absolute certainty that it had meant to chase me back here all along. I made it home somehow, although I couldn't exactly tell you how. The next morning when the storm had passed, I went back to try to retrace my steps. But the snow had covered everything, erasing any evidence of what had happened. If it weren't for the scratches on the back of my jacket and the lingering smell of wet fur that took 2 washes to get out, I might have convinced myself that it was all just panic and imagination. I have to say, up until this month, I kind of thought of Traverse City, Michigan as a sort of a boring little place. Well, those days are gone. Now I realize that we live on the edge of a wilderness that has feral monsters living in it. 8-foot-tall wolves that walk on their hind legs and chase townsfolk off their turf if they ever find themselves lost in Werewolf Woods.
Need a last-minute gift for a Dogman fan? Well, listen up, friend, I've got your plan. A feature-length special you'll always remember, only seen before by our channel members. Dogman, no, let's go! The bloody werewolf! I saw a Dogman eat a truck! Dogman rules, he got the funk! Christmas, Kwanzaa, Hanukkah too, it's a perfect gift for you, and you don't gotta wait to see it. The digital download is completely immediate. It's not disgusting. Werewolf Stories Christmas digital stocking stuffer for only $5 American. The perfect gift for the werewolf lover in your life. Link is in the description.
The 2014 snowstorm Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have a wintertime Dogman story for you. It's a story I almost didn't survive to share, as it happened inside what might have been the worst snowstorm to ever hit Georgia or the American Southeast. I almost froze to death in that snow, and the only thing that kept me going was the Dogman snapping at my heels. Let me start at the beginning of the story, which was actually in Florida, not Georgia. It was February in 2014, and I had attended a business sales meeting for the company I worked for down in Miami, where it was warm and nice. When it came time to go home, the forecast was for a bad snowstorm to hit Georgia. A number of the attendees got early flights out, and I was urged not to drive home to Virginia through that weather. I had learned to doubt weather forecasters, though, as they seemed to always be predicting storms that never materialized, or at least were never as fierce as they predicted. I thought it sounded like a nice and peaceful drive home, watching the snow fall silently and having the roads largely to myself. Well, by the time I was driving north through Georgia, I sure had the roads to myself all right. There were abandoned cars here and there, but no working ones. It looked like the world had ended. There were no people anywhere, just remnants of what looked like a defeated and crushed former human civilization. The radio was telling me that all flights from local airports were canceled until further notice. Literally thousands of flights called off. I realized I had bet on the wrong horse, that I was in deep poo-poo. Giving up a little too late can sometimes be a problem for me. I get stuck in my ways sometimes and I adapt too slowly. I guess it took this snowstorm to get me to realize that. It wasn't the first time I had miscalculated in this way, but it was the one that led to the worst inconveniences I'd ever brought down on myself. I finally decided to get off the highway and look for a local hotel at a point where the traction was so low that I literally was driving along at about 5 miles per hour. The car began overheating and conked out so fast that I didn't even have time to pull off to the side of the road once I realized what was happening. I was stalled in the right lane of the highway. I had seen a motel about 2 exits back, but that seemed like a hike that would take me 2 hours in that weather. I hoped that I might find a closer place to stay if I walked forward through the snow to the next town. Again, why did I make this decision in such an uninformed manner? I had maps in my glove compartment of the entire route from Florida to Virginia, and I possibly might have had them on my phone as well, but I don't remember that part. The GPS on my car was broken, but I had at least one other, maybe 2 other options. Yet I still decided to just play a hunch again and walk further north. This, in spite of the fact that it was a hunch of mine which had led me into this situation in the first place. If I could go back in time and call myself an idiot, I would. But sometimes we have to almost get ourselves destroyed before we can learn a lesson, and that's the way it was with me. I trudged down the highway with the wind blowing snow into my eyes, making them burn and making it harder to see. Everything was white. I started walking for short distances with my eyes clamped shut, then opening them to regain my bearings, then closing them to walk a bit further. After about a half hour of this, I was still on the highway looking for the exit. I thought about walking back to the relative warmth of my car, but when I turned around, I literally couldn't see it any longer. It might take me even longer to walk back than it had taken me to walk to where I was. Returning to my forward movement, I eventually did find the turnoff, which was uphill and very slippery. The wind picked up, and I managed to slip and fall, completely losing my sense of direction in the process. When I had caught my breath to get up and walk again, I soon discovered I had taken a wrong turn somewhere, and I was now walking through trees. I wasn't sure how I had even ended up there, as the ramp leading off the highway had seemed to be lined by snowy ground on both sides. I stopped and turned around and around and around, looking to find anything that seemed at all familiar, anything that might tell me where I had turned wrong, or where I should turn now to get it right. The more I looked, however, the more confused I became, and so I decided to give up and ask for help. I reached into my pocket and felt around for my cell phone, but it was not there. I panicked and checked every pocket, but I had a distinct memory of placing it in my right front jacket pocket, and it was not there. I thought it must have fallen out when I took that tumble back there near the off-ramp from the highway, so I turned in what I guessed would be the direction to get back there, and I began trudging along semi-blindly. I knew I was in a really bad situation, and I was beginning to grasp that every single decision I had made was only making things worse and worse. This was moving from me being delayed and inconvenienced to me entering a life-threatening situation out of which I might never climb. My heart was now beating in a somewhat panicked way, and I was beginning to grow very scared. I noticed my toes were cold and wet, and that they were in the first stages of starting to grow numb. I was beginning to fill with sadness and regret on top of the panic, and I needed something good to happen fast. That's when I saw something incredibly massive moving through the snowstorm. When I say massive, in this case, I mean man-mountain kind of massive. It was something maybe 8 feet tall, too large to be a man. It was partially in silhouette, and it was covered in snow. It was moving along in my general direction through the trees which surrounded both of us. My first impression was that it was literally an abominable snowman in the sense of an animated man made of snow walking toward me. Then, when it got maybe 40 or 50 feet away, it stopped and shook itself, not unlike the way a dog will shake rain or snow off of itself. When it did so, I could make out a very wolf-like head on top of this man-like creature. So, it was not a Yeti, and it was not a Sasquatch, but it was as tall and wide as either are reported to be. I cursed out loud. I think I was cursing the fates or something. The dog-headed man-mountain didn't seem to care for my attitude, though, and it dropped to all fours, lowering its head to my level and baring its incredibly long teeth at me. If it wanted to impress, it succeeded. I was ready to end this farce at that point. I was ready to drop to my knees like a bad football player and get ready to meet my maker, and it's possible I even might have done that literally. Parts of it get all blacked out in my memory now, as I was probably in shock, and my brain might have been getting ready to go out of business and shut down for good. The next thing I remember clearly was marching through the woods, hearing the giant beast behind me. I could hear it matching me step for step, and when I would slow down, it would growl from behind me and way up over my head. At that point, I would speed up as much as I could, but exhaustion and frostbite were going to catch up sooner or later, and there wasn't going to be anything I would be able to do to keep moving forward at that point. I was becoming loopy and emotional, feeling dizzy and sentimental. I wished I could talk to the Dogman and find out what he really was. Was he a kind of a bear? Or an ancient ground sloth? How could a dog walk upright or grow to such an enormous size? I wanted it to know I bore it no ill will, even if it decided to eat me later on to stay alive. Better for one of us to survive than neither of us, I thought. I was becoming a blithering idiot, but when everything seems about to end, you can get sentimental for what once was. So many things we take for granted in life, then, when they all get taken away, we suddenly feel such a deep sense of love for them. It's like how some people jump out of airplanes so that they can remember to appreciate how fragile life is. They put themselves in situations where they need to be completely alert in order to get through it, uninjured and alive. That's exactly where I was, and from that vantage point, even the harder times of my life seemed so comfortable in comparison. I remembered back to being forced by my parents to shovel snow. I was so bummed out by it, so resentful. I felt like they were trying to freeze me to death, and that they didn't care about me just because my toes would be cold by the time I got back inside. At least I could feel my toes back then. Oh, how I wished I could shovel my parents' driveway one more time. Oh, to go back to having the problems I used to have. The worst things that had ever happened to me in my entire life seemed like a Hawaiian vacation compared to what I was trying to survive on that day. The huge Dogman growled, and I realized I'd been standing still, nearly falling asleep on my feet. This wasn't going well, and it was only getting worse and worse and worse. I had run out of ideas, and I had run out of strength. I was beginning to lose my logical mind. Soon, I knew I would lose consciousness as well, and then that would be all she wrote. At least I might pass while asleep, I thought. It might be a peaceful way to go.
Maybe I was lucky, I thought. Just like I didn't appreciate shoveling snow when I was young, maybe I wasn't appreciating the mercy and kindness being shown to me on that day. Maybe this was my fate, and maybe it was a sign of universal love that I would only comprehend once I was permanently out of my limited human ego. Or maybe that Dogman would have me for lunch, and maybe it would be the most excruciatingly horrible experience that a living thing could suffer through. My face was frozen, and my mind was feeling like it was beginning to get ready to congeal as well. My brain was probably turning to jello, I thought. That made me laugh, or at least it made me want to laugh. My face felt frozen, and the strength for laughter had long since gone. I turned around, ready to offer myself to the Dogman beast. I tried to talk, but words didn't come out. I blinked through the raging snow and tried to meet the eyes of the beast for one last time. While I was doing so, I caught sight of a third member of the party. There was a large black bird in a tree, and it was working hard to keep itself on that branch of that tree. The wind and snow were conspiring to knock it off, but the bird was resisting them. Why was it there? It should have left before the weather got this bad. That bird was as denatured as I was. It was just like me, which meant it was stupid. I felt my heart going out to the creature. It was my soulmate. It was the same as I was. We had lived our entire lives only to end up getting to pass on side by side. This was my brother. This was my best friend. And it didn't matter that we were only going to spend this brief moment together. Our lives were still inextricably entwined, and we were one and the same conscious entity. This is how I felt. Then, an idea popped into my frozen daiquiri of a brain. Give the Dogman the bird to eat instead of me. All the feeling of camaraderie and kinship disappeared in one moment, as I spied a sharp-looking rock on the ground and bent over to pick it up. Confusion ensued. Then I realized I had fallen over into the snow. I wanted to go to sleep, but I knew the sleep would never end if I did. So, I relocated the rock, grasped it, and slowly began the process of regaining my footing. Once I was again as bipedal as the huge Dogman, I aimed, as well as I could, toward that large ebony flying animal, and I fired that projectile as hard and as unerringly as I could toward my target. I knew that it was him or me, that if I couldn't offer the Dogman a worthy sacrifice, he would take me instead. Everything that I had ever done in my life had led up to this single moment, and I had to put all of myself into that throw. Nothing ever had mattered so much, and if I were to continue to survive, I would need to get this throw right. The stone slipped out of my frozen hand and landed a pathetic few feet in front of me. I collapsed to the ground, and I wept, or as close as I could get to weeping under the circumstances. I had failed. I had fallen in an odd way, and I was watching the Dogman now. I was kind of upside down and sideways on top of something, I didn't know what. Maybe I had broken my body on a large stone because I knew I was unable to move. All that was left of me were my eyes and my delusional, illogical remnants of consciousness. As I watched, I saw that Dogman had noticed the bird I'd been trying to give it as an offering. It reached out and grabbed it, then swallowed it, in no short order. At least, that's the way my memory tells me it happened. Seems impossible that it could have gone down that way, but the images in my mind tell me the story in just that way. Then, I watched as the Dogman walked back the way that he and I had come from, and I prayed that he would go find my cell phone and bring it back to me. That's how illogical and far gone I was at that moment. It felt so good to lay there. I decided that it wouldn't hurt anything if I just took a little nap. Maybe I would even recover some of my strength if I did that. It made more and more sense to just go to sleep, and I couldn't remember anymore why I had been trying to stay awake. So silly, to be awake and hurting all over when one could be dreaming and feeling fine. That part of me that wanted to stay awake was mocked and driven away, and soon I found myself in dreamland. My entire body ached as I woke up in a very ugly room I was entirely unfamiliar with. I tried to sit up, but that hurt even worse, so I stopped trying. Then I tried to speak, but I coughed instead and coughed again, feeling as though I were going to choke. There was a flurry of activity, and human beings were there, moving me and doing things to me that I couldn't really understand. They were terrifying me. They had their hands all over me like I was some sort of object, and I wanted to scream in horror, but I was too busy choking. There were other incidents like that one, spaced out by long dreamless sleeping periods. I was in a hospital. It took days before I was back to normal enough for the nurses and doctors to start explaining things to me. Apparently, search teams were sent out looking for people who had abandoned their vehicles on the highway. They were able to identify me from my license plates, and so they knew who they were searching for, and that I had not yet checked into any hotel or motel or hospital. I hadn't thought of that, but it made perfect sense once they explained how I was found. I had such an intense feeling of gratitude for the people who think ahead and set up agencies that can function in such a wise way to save the least wise of us, such as myself. I felt, and still feel, extremely humbled by my debt to those people. I literally would have been a goner that day, and instead, I'm fully recovered and only missed 1 week of work. They got to me before the frostbite did, and in spite of all my terrible decisions on that day, I got away with all of it. After they told me their stories of how I was saved, I started telling anyone who would listen about the Dogman who had followed behind me and kept me going through those woods on that snowy day. They would give each other weird looks and regard me as though I were insane. Only one of the nurses acted like she believed me, but she saw the story as my brain going into shutdown and hallucinating. She said that quite often people who think they are about to perish will see angels and guardians who help guide them to safety. She told me that it's just a part of ourselves that we project outward to help us feel safe in an unsafe situation. Of course, that was absurd. This was no angel. This was something closer to a devil. This was not a comforting presence. It was a giant monster that wanted to eat me. This was not something I was glad to see coming. This was something I was glad to see going. That Dogman was as real as the bird I tried to sacrifice to it. Yes, it kept me going that day, but it was just because it didn't want to waste energy fighting me. It wanted to wait until I couldn't fight back, then take me without resistance. It was no holy vision. It was a giant land carnivore, and I didn't hallucinate it. I escaped it. Nobody in my family, and none of my friends, think that I saw a real Dogman. They all agree with the doctors and nurses, even though the doctors and nurses weren't making sense. I will never change my story, because it is the truth. I saw, and I survived, the 2014 snowstorm Dogman.
I didn't know there was a real Rooster Cogburn, but now it starts to look as though I got learned. Please welcome new channel member Rooster Cogburn from the movie True Grit to the fold. His kind donation makes this episode possible. As a $3 a month channel member, Rooster gets to see not only our secret uncensored episodes, but the massive collection of archived secret stories from years past. I think it's 30 hours or 35 by now. But I'm trying to put another 5 or 6 hour long collection out for Christmas. It's just a matter of whether my computer can stand the strain. And speaking of strain, here is our international TB spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman. Hank! Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.